The Galactic Council chamber gleamed with crystalline precision, a monument to millennia of diplomacy, compromise, and arrogance. Suspended high above the luminous capital world of Halesia, it offered a view of the galaxy's fracturing peace, a view some still found comforting, despite the war inching ever closer. Ambassador Rylos of the Zentari clicked his mandibles, an agitated tick. His 4 eye stalks jittered as he addressed the assembled species. "The Skarnax have breached the veil systems," he announced, voice filtered through a universal translator. "They adapt faster than our AI battalions. They've learned to dismantle our code mid-battle." The chamber's lighting dimmed slightly, a programmed cue meant to underscore urgency. Dozens of counselors murmured across species and dialects. The Skarnax, bipedal, kite-inflated monstrosities with hive-driven logic, were winning. They had no mercy, no diplomacy, and no predictable military logic. They overwhelmed, consumed, and moved on. "We've lost 17 colonies," Rylos continued. "Entire cultures erased. And now Verdun 9. Our foothold in that quadrant will collapse within weeks. We must act." A lean, silver-scaled figure stood. Minister Davin of the Selari Empire adjusted his formal cloak, radiating the calm certainty of a species known for ruling, not fighting. "We've deployed our finest neural tacticians. And yet, we falter. What alternative is left, Ambassador?" From the far side of the amphitheater, a human representative stood. Older than most, with gray at his temples and lines carved deep into his skin, he looked almost fragile beside the sleek, bioengineered diplomats around him. He stepped forward with a slow but steady gait, his name quietly surfacing across data pads. Elias Rourke, Earth's last active envoy. "We have a proposal," Rourke said, voice rough but commanding. "A unit of Terran veterans. Combat experienced. Not drones. Not AI. Real soldiers." Snorts, whistles, and guttural laughs rippled across the chamber. "Veterans," the Yultari delegate chortled. "From Earth? The species that hasn't seen a war in over a century? What will you send us next? Farmers with pitchforks?" Rourke didn't blink. They've fought enemies that made Skarnax look like hunting dogs. They understand war in ways your simulations can't. Let us deploy them to Verdun. Let them hold the line. Minister Davin shook his head slowly. "No offense, Ambassador, but your kind surrendered warfare to machines generations ago. Even your planetary defense protocols are AI managed. What possible good could elderly humans do?" Rourke stepped forward again. His tone sharpened, became steel. These men were forged in a time when death wasn't sanitized, when survival meant crawling through mud and fire. They weren't programmed for battle. They lived it. They improvise. They adapt. They do not break. The silence that followed was tinged with a discomfort no one acknowledged aloud. The truth was unwelcome. Their own flawless systems had failed. Flawless logic didn't win wars anymore. "We'll take it under advisement," Davin finally said. Meeting adjourned. 3 days later, a priority broadcast from Verdun 9 shattered their complacency. High Command's last orbital station had fallen. Drones were scattered, fleets obliterated. The Skarnax had begun their ground surge. Population centers were being harvested. The council reconvened in chaos. No time for ceremony. Rylos stood again, mandibles clicking faster this time. "We've lost this sector. Unless reinforcements arrive within 48 cycles, the Skarnax will entrench." No one spoke for a long moment. Finally, Davin stood again, more subdued this time. "What of Earth's offer?" A quiet nod came from the human delegation. "They're en route," Rourke said. "Old men, yes. But they remember what everyone else forgot." The dropship sliced through Verdun 9's upper atmosphere with a rumble of aged engines. Inside, 9 figures checked their gear in silence. No biometric implants. No neural uplinks. Just muscle memory and grit. The leader, a man in his late 60s with a steel jaw and frost-gray buzz cut, adjusted the sling of his rifle. He wore a leather jacket beneath a modified combat harness. The others around him bore similar marks of time. Scars, old tattoos, cybernetic limbs from back when such things were mechanical and loud. A large German shepherd lay between two crates, ears twitching. Its harness carried a faded iron cross, reappropriated from history more than honor. 5 minutes, the pilot called. Captain Briggs didn't respond. He was studying a battlefield map, though most of it was irrelevant. The terrain had shifted since the last scan, just like every war he'd ever fought. Plans didn't survive contact with the enemy. They never did. The youngest of the team, a wiry man in his 50s named Hart, finally broke the silence. Think I'll be watching? Briggs glanced up. Probably. Expect a welcoming committee of smug aliens waiting for us to fail. Won't they be disappointed? Muttered another, chuckling softly. The drop bay opened. Wind howled. Snow lashed their faces as they stepped onto the surface of Verdun 9. The cold cut through armor like knives, but no one flinched. They marched, single file, into the blizzard. Overhead, high-resolution observation drones captured the moment. The footage was transmitted live to the Galactic Council, who watched from orbit. 9 old men and a dog, trudging into a war zone. The optics were terrible. The odds were worse. Minister Davin leaned back in his chair. "This is madness," he said, but Rylos for once was silent. Something about their gait, calm, assured, not desperate, chilled even as chitin. For hours later, the first report came in. An alien detachment, surrounded and pinned down in Sector 11, reported being extracted by unidentified Terran forces. Drones attempted to track the team's movement, but failed. A Skarnax nest, previously impenetrable, was reduced to smoldering wreckage. No heavy ordnance used. All done with conventional explosives, precision strikes, and old-fashioned infiltration. The alien commander, a young Thresson captain, gave a confused debrief. They moved like phantoms. No radio chatter. Just hand signals. One of them dropped into the trench beside me, handed me a frag, and said, "Count to 3. Then he vanished. Council members rewatched the footage. Blurry outlines in infrared. Shapes that flanked Skarnax sentries, neutralized them with ruthless efficiency, and slipped into the shadows. In the center of the squad, always visible, always pushing forward, Captain Briggs and the dog. The animal moved like it was bred for war, sniffing, signaling, leading. "They're ghosts," someone whispered. "They're humans," Roar corrected. By the end of the day, 5 Skarnax incursions have been stopped cold. Not by fleets, not by plasma artillery, but by a group of men who remembered how to fight without perfection. They made mistakes, but they compensated. They bled, but didn't break. Briggs sat with his team in a ruined outpost that night. Max curled at his feet, tail thumping lightly. Around a small fire, the old men chewed protein rations and swapped sarcastic remarks. Hart lit a cigarette against protocol. No one cared. "You think they'll believe it?" one of them asked. Briggs looked at the flame, eyes distant. "They'll believe it when we make them." Far above, in orbit, the council remained silent. But the war had changed, and the galaxy was just starting to remember what humanity really was. The snow on Verdun 9 didn't fall like it did on Earth. It was heavier, slower, almost deliberate, as if the planet itself mourned what was happening on its surface. Ash mingled with the snowflakes, and every breath drawn and felt like inhaling centuries of decay. Captain Briggs stepped off the landing ramp, boots crunching into the thick crust of frost and shattered stone. The horizon was scarred with fire and smoke. Somewhere beyond the hills, the Skarnax were preparing another push. "Fan out," Briggs said, low and certain. Maxley, the German shepherd, bounded forward, nose twitching, tail low. Its harness hummed faintly with the energy of a primitive scanner the team had modified mid-flight. Briggs watched the dog for a second longer than needed, then followed. Behind him, 8 other men fell into staggered formation. Each bore marks of age, but not weakness. Spines slightly stooped from years of carrying too much, eyes sunken but sharp, reflexes dulled by time, yet honed by instinct. There was heart, still wiry and restless, always one to break the silence with an offhand remark. Next came Santiago, built like a bear with one cybernetic arm grafted from a battlefield medkit. Dunbar, half-deaf, red lips better than most AI. Halvorsen and his twin scars. Milo with a limp. Price tall, quiet, and unervingly fast. And Keen, the oldest, with a sniper's stillness and a gaze that made even Briggs feel watched. They moved quickly, silently. The orbital intel was useless. Skarnax had overrun all relay points. But the terrain spoke. Burned trees, scorched soil, Skarnax husks lying curled like insect shells. Briggs crouched beside one and lifted a hand for halt. "This one's recent," he murmured. No frost on the carapace. Dunbar stepped up and knelt beside it. 2 hours, maybe less. Max whined once and turned northeast, low growl bubbling in his throat. Skarnax up ahead, Hart said, fingers resting on his rifle trigger. "Think they know we're here?" Briggs shook his head. "Not yet, but they will." They headed toward the ridge, low and careful. As they climbed, the wind howled louder, drowning out distant movement. But Max stopped just short of the crest. Briggs came up beside him and peered over. Below, a Thressin platoon, amphibious aliens with iridescent scales and long limbs, was pinned down behind Shattered Convoy. Skarnax warriors encircled them in classic pincers, using the terrain and limited visibility to press in. Briggs didn't hesitate. Hart, Price, flank left. Dunbar, get on overwatch. Santiago, you're with me. The rest, hit from the right on my mark. They moved like liquid shadow. No words, just nods, muscle memory, and trust. Dunbar scaled a collapsed outcropping with practiced efficiency, leveled his rifle, and began tagging targets with silent flashes of his scope. Hart and Price dipped under cover, vanishing into the swirl of smoke. Santiago checked his pack, primitive explosives set manually. No digital signatures to give them away. Briggs readied his knife. He always started with a knife. The Skarnax had no idea what was coming. The first one went down with a gurgle as Hart slipped a blade into the soft junction of its thorax. Price followed with a garrote around the antennae of another, dragging it backward and into silence. On the opposite flank, Halvorsen fired a burst, not at a soldier, but at a ridge, causing a mini avalanche that crushed 3 Skarnax beneath a wall of rock and ice. Then Santiago's charges went off. Explosions ripped through the lower valley, scattering the enemy line into disarray. Briggs broke cover with a low snarl. Now, they descended like wolves. Elder wolves, tired maybe, but still deadly. Briggs cut down 2 Skarnax with smooth, brutal efficiency, sidearm barking once before he switched to close quarters. Max tore through a smaller warrior, leaping with the ferocity of a creature half its age. The Thressin soldiers, dazed, rallied and joined the fight. Within minutes, the field was silent save for the whimper of wind and a few dying Skarnax twitches. Briggs leaned against a scorched transport, chest heaving, blood splattered across his jacket. The commander of the Thressin squad approached, eyes wide. "You are Terrence." Briggs nodded, then gestured to Max, who was licking his paws. Human veterans, he said. Retired. Apparently not anymore. The alien looked at the corpses, the clean execution, the surgical tactics, the absence of wasted motion. Your methods, they're not in the doctrine. No, Briggs said. They're not in your doctrine. But this isn't a war you can fight with textbooks. The Thressin offered a shaky salute. We were going to die. Your team saved us. Hart lit a cigarette behind them, uncaring of alien protocol. Yeah, we do that sometimes. The humans disappeared into the smoke again before the alien could ask another question. That evening, they found shelter in a ravaged observation post half buried in snow. Inside, the lights flickered, comms equipment long since dead. Briggs rolled out a half-functioning thermal sheet while Max curled beside a reactor vent for warmth. Dunbar fiddled with his short-range radio. Static. No ping. No friendlies within at least 100 clicks. We'll push east, Briggs said. Satellite said there was a relay tower in the mountain pass. Satellite also said there was a field hospital at the last coordinates, Santiago muttered. We found half of it on fire. We move anyway, Briggs replied. While they're still confused. Price glanced over. Think they know who we are yet. Briggs looked down at his bloodied gloves, then out the broken viewport at the cold wasteland. They will. He didn't need to say whether he meant the Skarnax or the Council. Max perked up suddenly, ears twitching. A low growl rumbled in his throat again. Something out there? Hart asked. Briggs stood, rifle raised. Light discipline. Get ready to move. The squad rose with groans and clinking armor, like old gears warming up. They didn't complain. They never did. They knew the rhythm of war too well to argue with it. As they slipped back into the night, unseen and unheard, the Council's latest transmission crackled faintly through Dunbar's set. An unintended leak, a conversation not meant for Terran ears. They're destabilizing the entire front, one voice said. Even the Skarnax are adjusting their tactics. They're disrupting protocol, another replied. This isn't war. It's chaos. They're humans, a third voice said, quieter than the others. It's always chaos with them. Dunbar chuckled to himself as the signal faded. You're damn right. And somewhere in the dark, Max growled again, low, steady, ready. The night would not remain quiet for long. The mountain pass was narrower than expected, an icy cleft between obsidian cliffs where the wind screamed like a wounded animal. Briggs trudged at the front, eyes scanning the jagged skyline for any sign of motion. Snow crunched beneath their boots in rhythms familiar only to those who had marched for decades. Max walked slightly ahead, nose to the ground, tail rigid. They'd lost contact with command days ago. Not that command mattered anymore. The brass had left them to die from the start, a symbolic gesture wrapped in desperation. But the squad was far from dead. They were moving, thinking, adapting. Every Skarnax nest they burned, every overrun platoon they rescued, became another proof that old soldiers still had value in a galaxy drunk on precision algorithms and strategic paralysis. We're coming up on the relay tower, Dunbar whispered, pointing toward the silhouette of a shattered structure clinging to the mountainside like a broken ribcage. Briggs raised a fist, signaling a stop. He turned slowly, eyes narrowing. Set a perimeter. Halvorsen, Price, watch the north ridge. Hart, you're with me. Hart fell in beside him without question, weapon loose but ready. The two advanced up the slope in silence. As they climbed, the remains of the relay station revealed themselves. A half-collapsed dome, its comms dish crumpled like paper, antennae severed clean. Inside, the silence was oppressive. Something felt wrong. Briggs signaled halt again. He knelt beside a patch of blackened snow, touched it with his glove, and brought it to his nose. Bird acid, he muttered. Skarnax bioplasma. Hart nodded. They've been here. Not recently. They advanced carefully into the remains of the dome. The comms console sparked faintly, a single status light blinking amber. Briggs knelt and opened a side panel, reaching into a mess of frozen wires and melted plastic. He pulled out a portable transmitter, battered but intact. Hart exhaled. Think it still works? Briggs nodded, fingers already adjusting the frequency. He dialed to an old code, one not used since Earth's final planetary war. A relic, but sometimes relics still whispered. The device crackled. Repeat, to any listening force, this is Echo Red Actual. Terran unit. Position, Verdun 9, Mount Kalos Pass. Request situational report. Repeat. A burst of static. Then, faintly, Echo Red read you. This is Rylo's command. Confirming Terran presence. Your actions have been noted. Stand by. Hart blinked. Well, that's new. Briggs looked up at the tower's cracked dome. We're not invisible anymore. They returned to the squad, who had already begun securing the slope. Santiago was wiring motion-triggered charges along the cliff's edge. Keen sat beside Max, cleaning his rifle with the precision of a jeweler. Price had his binoculars locked on the northern horizon. We're being watched, Price said without turning. Far side of the ridge. Movement low and fast. Briggs didn't hesitate. Battle stance. Tight circle. We're not running. Max barked once and darted ahead, ears flattened. The humans followed, slotting into position like parts of a living machine. From the snow, the Skarnax came. Not dozens, hundreds. They moved like a tide, insectoid limbs slicing the snow, eyes glowing with the same furious hunger they always bore. But something was different. They weren't charging recklessly. They fanned out, probed, searched for gaps. They had learned. They're adapting again, Dunbar growled, loading fresh rounds. They're learning us now. Let them learn, Briggs said. We'll still break them. The first wave struck hard. Skarnax warriors hurled acid and blade, meeting gunfire and explosives mid-surge. Briggs dropped 3 with headshots before switching to his sidearm. Hart flanked wide, rifle humming as he laced precise bursts through their ranks. Max danced through the chaos, biting and feinting, dragging one of the creatures into the snow with brutal precision. Santiago triggered a wall charge. Icy rock exploded, sending a dozen Skarnax tumbling into the abyss. They fought like men who died before and come back angrier. But even veterans tire. The third wave came heavier, harder, creatures larger than before, covered in natural armor. Dunbar went down, bleeding from a slash across his back. Keen dragged him behind cover, returned fire without flinching. We need a way out, Santiago grunted. We're boxed in. Briggs scanned the cliff wall. No exits. No caves, just snow and blood. Then Max barked. Not a warning, but insistence. He stood on a patch of ground, pawing furiously. Follow him, Briggs ordered. Now! The dog bolted, leading them along a narrow switchback trail hidden behind a sheet of ice. The squad moved fast, carrying Dunbar, covering each other. The trail curved upward, around the side of the ridge. Behind them, the Skarnax pursued, closer, smarter, relentless. Price stopped at the bend, laid his last charge on a natural overhang, and detonated it just as the front line of Skarnax surged forward. A rain of boulders swallowed the trail behind them. Silence followed. Snow drifted gently down again, as if to erase the battle's fury. They reached a hollowed cavern just under the summit and collapsed inside, breathing ragged, blood steaming on the stone. Dunbar was conscious but pale. Hart ripped open a medkit, injecting stabilizers. Santiago crouched beside Briggs. That wasn't a patrol. That was a test. Briggs nodded grimly. They wanted to know if we were worth fearing. Think they got their answer? I think they're still deciding. Max padded over to Briggs and dropped a small, chitinous fragment into his lap. A broken Skarnax crest plate. Briggs stared at it, then held it in his gloved palm. "Tomorrow," he said, voice low, "they'll come in force." No one asked how he knew. They had all seen the shift. The Skarnax weren't treating them like anomalies anymore. They were treating them like threats. As the squad settled into defensive positions, the portable transmitter blinked again. A new message arrived. Echo read, "Council requests tactical assessment. Acknowledges prior disregard. You are now designated autonomous strike unit. Full discretion granted." Keen chuckled for the first time in days. "Look at that. We're official again." Briggs didn't smile. He clipped the crest plate to the inside of his coat, near his heart. Then he turned toward the cave mouth, watching the snow fall. "They're listening now, so we'll give them something worth remembering." Outside, the night thickened, but none of the humans slept. Tomorrow, war would come again, and this time, it would be watching them. The morning broke over Verdun, not with sunlight, but with the dull roar of tremors rolling through the mountains. The storm had passed, leaving a brittle stillness, as if the world was holding its breath. Ice clung to the ridge above the cavern where Briggs and his squad had taken shelter, catching the pale glint of distant fire. Max was the first to rise, ears pricked and body tense. His growl was low, steady, and undeniable. Briggs had already been awake. He sat with his rifle across his lap, watching the mouth of the cave where snow fluttered down like ash. One by one, the others stirred. Keen passed a small flask of synth coffee to Santiago. Halvorsen rechecked the remaining charges. Hart pressed a bandage to Dunbar's shoulder, careful and quiet. No one spoke. There was no need. The Council's latest message had come hours earlier, a coded burst too late to help and too political to matter. Hold position. Reinforcements en route. As if they believe it now. Briggs stood. "We make our stand here." Price looked up from his scope. "You're certain they'll come? They can't ignore us anymore. That charge yesterday blocked their path. They'll try to eliminate the anomaly." "The anomaly," Santiago muttered, shaking his head. "That's what we are now." Briggs stared into the wind. "No," with a warning. They fortified the cave as best they could. The natural choke point offered advantage, but only if they fought like they'd never get another chance. Santiago layered mines beneath snowdrifts along the slope. Hart reprogrammed a downed Skarnax limb into a makeshift motion alarm. Max paced the entrance tirelessly, hackles up. It was near midday when they heard it. The scraping of countless claws against stone. A hiss, like steam escaping from a wounded engine. Then silence. Waiting. Watching. The first wave came from below, climbing the cliffs. Smaller Skarnax scouts, fast and lithe, probing the defenses. Hart took the first shot, clean through a slit in the rock. The insectoid shrieked and tumbled back, triggering a mine that tore a hole in the slope. Then the rest charged. The battle was chaos contained in brutal rhythm. Gunfire stuttered in short bursts, echoing down the mountain. Explosives lit up the ridge like a jagged heartbeat. Skarnax warriors fell in clusters, dismembered, burning, crushed under rock slides triggered by Halvorsen's careful placements. But they kept coming. Briggs moved like a machine, precise, unyielding. Every shot found a target. Every motion economical. When he wasn't firing, he was calling adjustments, shifting the line, reinforcing where it buckled. Max fought beside him, teeth bloody, unrelenting. Keen's rifle snapped like a whip, picking off Skarnax captains from impossible angles. Dunbar, wounded but steady, directed power from a scavenged relay battery to rig a final blast zone, an endgame measure if the cave fell. "They're adapting faster," Price yelled over the gunfire. "They're using cover now." Santiago lobbed a thermite grenade. "Let's see how they adapt to this." The grenade lit up the snowfield in a wave of fire. The advancing Skarnax reeled, screeched, fell back, only to be replaced by another rank seconds later. Briggs gritted his teeth. Then the cliff wall exploded. A Skarnax behemoth, taller than a dropship and clad in glistening armor, surged from a side tunnel. It bellowed with a roar that shattered stone, flanked by two heavily modified sentinels. This wasn't random. This was a strategic push. "They've learned our tactics," Keen said, calm even as he reloaded. "They're coming for command." Briggs didn't answer. He ran. He sprinted down the line, barking orders. "Santiago, draw them left. Hart, Price, focus fire on the big one's joints. Keen, get elevation." The squad shifted instantly. Santiago laid a trail of mines leading into a narrow gap between boulders. Briggs leapt to Max's side and led the dog straight into the behemoth's path. The creature charged, thunder in motion. Briggs slid beneath a slab, raised his rifle, and emptied a clip into the behemoth's leg joint. Armor cracked, but didn't break. Max launched himself onto its back, digging teeth into exposed sinew. The creature roared and reared, smashing Max against the wall. "No!" Briggs shouted. Time slowed. He rose, ran, fired again. Beside him, Halvorsen hurled an anti-vehicle charge beneath the beast. It detonated with a deafening blast. The behemoth staggered, one leg gone. Hart and Price peppered it with fire from either side. Finally, it fell, screaming, crashing into the mountainside. The other Skarnax began to retreat, but not in panic. In formation. The strike was over. The test concluded. Briggs rushed to Max's side. The dog lay still, chest rising in shallow jerks. Blood matted the fur. When I blinked slowly, Briggs dropped to his knees, cradled Max's head. "You did good, boy," he whispered. "Real good." Max licked his hand once, then went still. Briggs lowered his head. The battle was over, but grief made the silence deafening. The squad stood in the wreckage of victory, eyes on their captain. None spoke. They had known loss before, lovers, comrades, homes. But Max was different. Max had been family. Santiago crouched and placed a hand on Briggs's shoulder. "We'll bury him here. Highest ground. He earned that." Briggs nodded, voice caught in his throat. They dug a grave atop the ridge, wrapping Max in the torn Terran flag for Briggs's own pack. No words, just salutes. As twilight fell, the snow began again. The portable transmitter crackled once more. This time a new voice. Calm, calculated. Echo read, "This is Council stratagem. Your actions have redefined multiple combat doctrines. Request debrief. Transport en route." Briggs stood slowly, looking out over the scorched valley where the Skarnax had broken themselves on human defiance. He picked up Max's collar and clipped it to his belt. "Tell them," he said in the transmitter, "we don't need a debrief." A pause. "Excuse me. Tell the council we've sent their report already." He turned toward his squad, voice growing louder. "Tell them they'll read it in the scars we left behind." He tossed the transmitter aside. "Where to now?" Hart asked. Briggs looked east, toward the smoke trails on the horizon. Another fight, another doomed squad. "Let's go remind the galaxy why it stopped fighting us the first time." And with that, the old soldiers gathered their gear, slung their weapons, and descended the ridge, not as relics, but as a storm reborn. The war wasn't over, but neither were they.